Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 142, and I hope we're going to have an exciting topic today. Uh, we may be a little bit short today, but we'll see. Play it by ear. Hope that as you join us, that you will let us know that you have joined us and where you're joined from. Be sure to make comments, ask questions, because your engagement's what makes the show. So, Anton, you want to introduce our topic today?
Good morning, folks. As Kevin said, thank you so much for joining. Let us know where you're joining from, and don't forget to hit the like button, because when you guys engage and you hit the like button, it makes sure to show you the show next time it comes around. We're not just trying to have a popularity contest, but we do want to make sure that you can get our show when it comes out in the future. Today, we're going to be talking about identity. This was maybe 2016, 2015, when I came up with an idea of Human SOS. Wasn't even called Human SOS back then. That was actually Kevin's idea. But one of the first things that came to mind of why people live so unsustainably is because we always chase an idea of what somebody else think we should be. Right? We're always trying to be something for somebody else. We're always trying to, peacock, as some people might say. And it's one of the most stressful things. And we don't even think about how much time and how much brain power it takes to try to be a version of ourselves that we think somebody else wants us to be. And it's so important to set who we are, but from within ourselves, and really come to peace and accept that not everybody's going to like us, not everybody's going to love us, but those that do, when we are truly ourselves, are going to be with us, for who we are. And we don't have to pretend. We don't have to, drive fancy cars and all that kind of stuff. And where it came from, I noticed a lot of people acting that way when I was living in Scottsdale, Arizona. There was what we called a lot of $100,000 millionaires. And what that means, it's people that are making $100,000, but they're trying to pretend and look like they're millionaires, driving cars they can't afford, having houses that, are beyond their reach, living in massive amounts of debt. And that made me realize that there's things that we can do in order to avoid that and be way happier than having those fake friends that, want us to continue to do that. So what are your thoughts on identity, just to start out, Kev?
Well, something occurred to me as I was writing up our stream today that, sometimes imposter syndrome is unfounded and it's based on wrong narratives and things. But it occurred to me that part of the reason some people feel the imposter syndrome is because they're trying to be an imposter. They're trying to live somebody they're not, either because of influence from culture, society, that like you said, well, you need to live like a millionaire. In fact, wasn't there a saying at one point that says, if you want to be a millionaire, live like one, or something like that, kind of anticipation. And that is, in my estimation, one of the cruelest taskmasters, is to live up to something we're not. And it creates so many issues. In fact, your example of people with 100,000 living like millionaires, I'll never forget. I did work years ago in a neighborhood here in town, and it was a very affluent neighborhood, very expensive houses. And I actually went to do some work on one of them, and went inside, and there was no furniture because they couldn't afford to buy furniture because they were spending so much on the house. And I thought, that's sad. That's scary. From the outside they've got this nice appearing house, but on the inside it's empty. And I thought, yeah, that's an example of what it means not living who you are.
It's interesting. We always talk about stress, and if folks, if you watch the show for a long time, you probably know that everything we talk about in some shape or form connects to stress. And it's not just the regular concept of stress. It's really overuse of our resources, right? Not the natural resources on the planet, but internal resources, our brain power, our, supporting our body, physiology, whatever it may be. And we don't think about how much energy it takes to fake it till you make it, or just fake it, right?
Mm.
It's exhaustive. Your brain is constantly feeling like something or somebody is watching you all the time. There's something about imposter syndrome that's real to certain people, right? Like some people belong where they are who they are, but they just feel like maybe they made it there too fast, or they don't belong in that role, or they don't deserve it. It's very real. But your point, like there's a lot of imposter syndrome for people who are just imposters,
Mm.
or it's not even intentional. They just don't
Right.
have a set identity of who they are, and they're kind of like a tumbleweed that blows in the wind. So I talk about oak trees all the time, and this analogy to me is always resonated. You want to be an oak, right? Like you want to plant deep roots, and that is just the foundation of your identity. And what that allows you to do is to grow vertically, compounded growth, year after year after year. You're growing from the same foundation. You are maturing. You're getting thicker, thicker trunk that can withstand storms. What are those storms? Being, events in life. So you were fired. That doesn't necessarily change who you are. But if you haven't planted strong roots, if you haven't become that strong oak, instead you're a tumbleweed.
Mm.
And you may have this rapid growth in a certain way because you're just faking it till you make it. And all of a sudden a storm comes and you have no roots and you just get blown over, or the season ends and you just die off and now you're blowing in the wind somewhere. And think about how many people in your life are those tumbleweeds blowing in the wind from one storm to one direction, constantly shifting, constantly moving, lots of growth happening maybe every season, but it's never compounded because it misses that deep rooted foundation.
Welcome, Sharon. Always good to see you and have you with us. And yeah, so many analogies like the rudderless ship going around with no way to steer and direct because you don't have that clear understanding of who you really are. Again, I think that our current cultures are driven so much by that because of groups we hang out with, and a lot of our understanding of our identity quite often is taken up by what we think is success looks like. And in fact, what a thing that we do that I think contributes to this is that we say, okay, that person that I see is what I think success looks like, and really believe it. The problem is that they then, rather than learning the principles that that person has used to get where they are, they literally try to emulate or copy that person and live that person's life. And none of us, we may look the same, we may even be the same, a lot of common things, but no two of us are exactly alike. So it's impossible for us to live like someone else. We can learn the principles they've applied and different things and apply them in our lives, but we can't be them. And if you're basing your identity on what you picture someone else as being successful and doing what they do all the time, wow, that sounds miserable to me. I just let's see. Sharon has a comment. Says, I've never cared about material things as much. I'm happy, especially in today's environment, that we bought a house a long time ago that we could afford, not to act like what we used to call the Joneses. The old saying, keeping up with the Joneses. A lot of that happens without doubt. Um, and
Absolutely.
sure,
And it's not always just material things, right? Material things is kind of what we think about all the time, but it's the idea of what we see, say, in other people. there's just a problem with it. A lot of times we see the best of them, right?
Mm.
Social media is the worst at this thing. We
Mm.
talk about how social media, we see highlight reels of people's lives and not really their true lives, because people don't put their bad stuff. Even the stuff that we see people being vulnerable, a lot of times it's curated vulnerability. And what I mean by that is they've already overcome something and now they're talking back about it.
Right.
There's rarely that we see vulnerability of somebody struggling in the moment and saying, I can't figure this out. Like, I don't have the answers. I am really doing poorly. But the point is, there's many avenues that we can look at people and say, wow, they're doing so great. And we're just seeing it in that way, whether it be how they are as a parent, whether it be how their relationship is. They think, oh, they've made it and my relationship is not that. And I'm going to pretend like it is. And, I see that from spouses or partners where they're acting in public one way, but then you see them behind closed doors or in a private setting. It's a completely different, they're completely different people. So it involves all these different things. But the bottom of it is people are unbalanced. And whenever we chase that one thing that we see in other people, we end up being even more unbalanced. Instead of coming down and saying, here's who I am or here's who I want to be, kind of not setting it in stone, because you're always going to be moving a little bit as you grow, you mature, you're going to adjust. But these are tweaks. We're not replanting roots in a completely different place. We're just adjusting, right? Back to the oak tree analogy, it's a branch growing in a slightly different direction, right? This year, the leaves are more facing this way than they were the other way, whatever it may be. It may be adjusted to the wind, who knows? But the point is, it's really identifying those things. So what I recommend for people to do is to have a life plan. We talk about life plans all the time.
Mm.
Like, if you don't have a life plan, you're not going to have a place that you can grow from, because it's like without having that North Star. But then there's other components. Kev, you probably will say vision, mission,
Mm.
purpose. Those are vital. I think that's really, the fuel. If I keep running with the analogy of an oak, that's what feeds the oak. That's what allows the oak to have, nutrients, water, soil, sunshine. That's what we need for identity. But we don't spend enough time on that. We don't sit down and break it all down, and we just kind of go through life and we react. We don't plan it out and grow like we should.
Well, and I think unfortunately it's because of multiple generations of people that never stopped and said, who am I? And really investigated that. I know for my generation, the idea of finding ourselves, when that started, it started after us. And the idea of finding ourselves was really almost silly or comical. And unfortunately, that was the mindset we approached it. And it has had negative impact starting with our generation and beyond. And those that wandered, if you will, were considered less than in our society. And rather than help them and encourage them to go through a discovery process, if you will, just ostracized or made fun of them. And it is a real problem. Uh, the, you know, part of it is that now with our culture, that there are so many different environments that factor in that have changed, because early on in our culture and the history of our country, and I think this is true across multiple countries, is that there were not so many different environments to grow up in and learn in. And so you took out at least some of that now between urban, suburban, uh, rural, and then you get into countercultures within different settings, and it just becomes really a mishmash of influences that really confuse things. And that's unfortunate that it's that way, because it makes it harder. And then as we have challenged traditional values, so that even values are now no longer considered a norm. There's not a norm in any kind of core values, and that's a real challenge. So let's see what Sharon's other comment. A lot of tumbleweeds blowing in the wind. We have a neighbor who is never satisfied with what she has. She always wants what other people have, never satisfied. For me, I grew up poor, but we valued what we did have. We never expected or wanted to live like someone else. Be happy with who you are, not what others want you to be. Indeed. And and then as our cultures come along, something occurs to me, originally with even currencies, before cash was the only currency to operate from. And either you had it or you didn't, or you had it in different degrees. With the advent of credit and those things, that has contributed to false identities, if you will, or people not living real because they can buy things they can't afford. And, that at one point that was difficult to do. Welcome, Abley. Glad to have you. So what do you think, Anton? What are the contributors and what can we think about doing to overcome?
So, identity is like a muscle. It's not something that you just kind of create or you build and all of a sudden it's there. It is developed over time. It's developed through resistance, right? It's developed through overcoming things. I'm a little bit maybe out there, but I'm a firm believer, and correct me if you think differently, but I mean, or express your opinion differently. I think you have to kind of step outside the norm sometimes to really fortify your identity. And here's a little story. I've been doing the show for a long time. I did the show for so long, I grew my hair out and then cut it, and been like the last year with short hair by now. But a long time ago, I decided I wanted to start growing my hair out. And it was like the third time of trying to do it. I've tried it before. And previously, this is how my hair was always even prior to military and definitely post-military. I would get a haircut every single week because I cut my own hair. It's easy, but I hated hair touching my ears. It goes like, oh my God, my hair's touching my ears. I gotta cut my hair. So I started growing it out for the third time, failed previous two times, over the last, previous few years. And I started getting comments. People are like, oh, why are you doing this? Like, oh, that looks terrible. Especially from like my mom, and just like, oh, Anton with her thick Russian accent, why you do this? This is ugly. Don't do it. And it started getting to me. And then I thought about it and I was like, what if I just kept going? What if I kept going and let people talk badly about it? What if I kept going and thought, when I walked around, put in a man bun or whatever. Everybody has a cliche against man buns, and now not as much, but a few years back it was a lot more of a thing that people made fun of. And what if I used that as something that fortified me, something that taught me to not care about what people think? And I don't mean not care, like I don't mean being a bad person and not care about what people think. I mean, live my life the way that I want to, still having good intentions, still having positive intentions for people, and having vision, purpose, all that other stuff. But when it comes down to my appearance, I actually thought at some point that like my hair doesn't look as good as it did before. But then for 2.5 years, I didn't get a haircut. I went from this to, 2.5 feet of hair that went, well below my shoulders. And it taught me over time to just, people are going to have opinions. It doesn't matter what haircut, hair color, car I drive, house I have. It's either A, never enough for them, or B, they're always going to want something different. And if all I do is chase what they want over and over and over, I'm never going to get anywhere. I'm trying to go from point A to point B, point C all over the place, and never really growing personally and within myself. So I tell people, do something that builds that identity muscle, right? Maybe it's not growing your hair out. Maybe it's not getting a green colored haircut. I'm not necessarily saying I'm going that route, but there's plenty of things that you can do that you may want to do or have an idea that you want to do, but you're afraid of doing it because you're afraid of what people are going to think about you. And the more opportunities you have like that in your life to step out and do that, the more you're going to be set in your identity. Now, that's how you practice it, right? With the life plan, vision, values, purpose, all that kind of stuff is how you begin to create it. And then you step out there, right? When somebody's values, or you see your values are being challenged, and oftentimes we sit down and we get quiet. We don't want to peek our head above, above ground and get smacked. But that's not the thing to do. The time to do it is properly find a way appropriate to do it. Sometimes it's inappropriate if you have to. But speak your mind. Say, this is not okay. And you notice the more you do that, the easier it becomes to do that, because identity is a muscle.
Well, I keep beating the same drum. Okay, we got to start with one place, and that is our value. Our value's not by anything that we do or say, anything anyone else does or says. It's intrinsic as a human being from our creator. And when we can accept that, then the rest of it becomes easier because it doesn't take away from our value. If we understand that we have our value. And then from there, there's so many great tools. And first thing, though, you have to be willing to take the look. I'm afraid that a lot of people aren't willing to take that look. They're afraid of what they might find or see. And you, at some point, you got to say, okay, whatever I find, whatever I come to understand, I've got to accept it and be okay with that. And environmental conditions around us, family, community can all cause pressures that we may feel like we can't do it. But if you don't do it, you're going to be miserable. You can write that one down. If you never understand who you are and begin to live that life, you will be miserable. You will be, and in extreme cases, you become unstable. And it is a horrible place to live, but there are so many people living in that place. They're trying to live, and either is not what they know, that it's not what they are, or what's really worse, and I think it happens most of the time, is people really just don't know. And so they're kind of living whatever comes along. And that, folks, I've been there. Okay. I've done that. And it is a miserable way to live. It just is. And so there are so many tools available. One of them, and we appreciate everyone's perspective on faith and beliefs and things, but one of the tools that is available to us to give us insight into us as at the core is the Bible. Whether you accept the tenets of faith that are in it, it is got so much rich history and understanding about what has been part of our history, and it gives us insight into ourselves on an individualized basis, partly because it just forces us to look at ourselves. And then there are so many personality typing and strength finders and so many tools like that. And then another one that is really insightful, and this is something learned years ago, but there is a process called an Enneagram. And I don't know if you've ever heard of an Enneagram, but an Enneagram is uh, a search of your family history from an emotional standpoint. And when you start looking around, because by the way, we're all a product of our family. And if you determine that you're not going to be a product of your family, you're guaranteeing you're going to be a product of your family. It's called an emotional focus. But learning your family, not just who lived when and that, but about who they were. And you'll get insight into who you are. It's a great exercise. So start with awareness and start with first recognizing your value and accepting that, and quit trying to prove your value by being something or someone you're not. And it's so freeing. At this point in my life, I can be me, and it's not a selfish or an ego thing. It's just that I no longer find myself trying to prove who I am, what I am, and the value I have to anybody, because it's not necessary. So, and it's much more peaceful that way, because I've stopped trying to prove myself to people. And, being right for the sake of proving your value is a dangerous thing. And I know I've lived it. And if anyone's interested, I've got an article on my profile that talks about it some for me. Anton, what tools or tips recommend?
Assessment. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up assessments, because I also want people to be cautious with assessments, right? It's just another label sometimes that can be put on us, and it tells us this is how you need to act, this is what you need to do. Assessments are a reflective tool. They're not like a future looking tool. They're not going to tell you who to be. They're going to tell you who you kind of are in comparison to other people and things like that. But it's still a test that is, as best of a guess as people can get. If you notice, like, your mood may be different, or the season of change may be different, and your scores will slightly be different, or maybe even, largely different. I've done some of these tests over, 20 years now. I think StrengthsFinder's been around for 15 plus years. And I've done that one many times. And some of the things that used to be my top one are maybe outside of my top 10 now, because I've become a parent since then, or I've done things differently since then. My mindset has shifted. I learned. So just be careful not to let assessment completely define who you are. Look at it, study it, see how you're interacting with other people, and even see if you like what it is, right? Like, you took this assessment and told you something. It's like, is that really what you want to be? And if not, revisit back, with yourself, and start to change it. Yeah, I think assessments still are great tools, and many coaches use them, but just don't get defined in a way and then kind of boxes you in feeling like that is. It's funny you mentioned Enneagram. I just took it a couple weeks ago for the first time. It is a pretty good one. I shared it with my girlfriend. She's like, "Oh, thanks for sharing with me. This is so spot on." She's like analyzing it, how I am, and what she sees, and how to deal with me. So it's definitely a good one.
Well, and I just realized I mentioned the wrong name. Enneagram's one of those tools. No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about a genogram.
Oh, a genogram. I haven't seen
my
that one.
apologies. Genogram is where you kind of go back and you do a family history based on what not when people lived and what location, but who they were, emotional indicators. And one easy way, and this requires having a relationship with your family, but ask your parents, your grandparents, whoever you can, and say, what is your view of me? And just listen. Don't defend it. Don't, just give them a chance to share their view. And they're not always going to be accurate and everything, but it certainly will give you insight, because they can talk about times that maybe you don't even remember when you were very young, and give you insights into yourself that will help you go, okay, because when we're that young, 2, 3, 4 years old, is when we're probably closest to living who we really are. And so don't make it hard. Go to your family and say, okay, tell me what I was like as a kid. And just listen. Don't go in going, well, I got to change their impression of me because they think I'm rotten or whatever. Just go and listen. And it can be very, very insightful into who you are.
I have to jump, Kev, because
Okay.
I have a work thing. But did you want? We're going to keep going.
I'll keep it rolling. I want to bring Sharon's comment. So
sorry, everybody, got a work thing to do. But thanks so much, and I will be back next week with Kev.
Blessings, brother.
Bye.
Okay. So understanding who we are is not something that may, because of environment and our history, it may not be natural to do. We may have decided, because of pain, because of emotional injury, different things, we may have blocked things. And those things are keeping us from figuring out and understanding who we actually are. So Sharon just shared a comment. I just went through that. I got tired of trying to be what others wanted me to be, and I'm happy with the person that I am. Prayers have helped me get through quite a lot recently. Be happy with who you are. If people don't appreciate you for being yourself, they are not worth it. And uh, and you hit on something there, Sharon. It's true, but quite often the reason that people look at us and don't like what they see in us is because they don't like what they see in them. And there's a principle, and we talk again biblical principle a lot. So I hope no one's offended or put off. But the fact is, there's a lot of wisdom there. And one of the things that is said in the Bible that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. There's two parts to that concept. We get focused on loving our neighbor, and that's great. We should. But the other part of that admonition or that direction or guidance is as yourself. And the problem is, too many of us don't love ourselves as we've been created. We somehow feel like we're not good enough, we're not this, we're not that. And we're always trying to be what we're not because we think that's what needs to happen for people to like us. And it's a terrible, terrible place to be. Again, I've been there, I've lived that way, and it is miserable. It is very confining. It's very stressful. And so, uh, again, find out who you are at the core, whatever ways you can do that using different tools, personality typing, Myers Briggs, DISC, Strength Finders, Enneagram. There are just so many tools that they don't tell you who you are, but like Anton said, they are a mirror. They help reflect where you're at, what you are, who you are at a given point, and find that out and begin to work through it. And I hope that, and I will likely do this until the day I die, but I want everyone to finally learn that as a human being, that we are priceless, that we have value that goes beyond anything, and it's not something that we earn, not possible. We can't earn our value, and the good news is, if we can't earn it, we can't lose it. Other people don't give us our value at all, and therefore their words, their actions cannot take it away. Our value is intrinsic in who we're created, and when we finally can come to terms with that and accept that, then we have a couple of growth opportunities from that. First of all, that gives us that foundation that Anton was talking about, that strong root system for the oak tree, because we're then able to put those roots in and nourish them and support them. And the second thing it does for us is it begins to give us some direction, and it's a great place to grow from. If you think about any good plans, if you're going to make a good plan and you don't assess where you are or what your current situation is, and you try to plan, wow. My military training, we always have to do, before we start planning, we have to do reconnaissance. We have to consider, where are we? What do we have? And so on first. But a lot of people in a lot of our cultures are making their plans based on unknown. They really don't get who they are, and they're planning to be what they're going to be without knowing who they are. And if you're doing that, unfortunately, you're putting yourself in a place of a lot of misery. Welcome, Jane. Glad to have you. Appreciate it. And Jane makes a comment that so well said, if we don't love ourselves, why should anyone else? And again, so true, Jane. And what is unfortunate that we have taken and misapplied a principle that loving ourselves became ego. Became sayings such as looking out for number one and the me generation and that sort of thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about going an ego trip and become self-centered and it's about me and all that. Not at all. That's why it's important to recognize that the me that I am is not because of me. It's because of my creator. The only reason I am who I am is I was created that way. So I can't take credit for that either. Just be sure that you learn that, because if we can't love ourselves, we're going to have a hard time loving others. Welcome, Z. Glad to have you join us on this side. Recently, Z's been trying out the YouTube channel, and so glad to have you on the LinkedIn side. But learning to love who we are created, not caught up in ego, but truly recognizing us as a person and the value we have and accepting that is so key, because it will allow us to then look at others and go, yeah, you're you, and that's okay. I don't need you to be like me to validate me. And hopefully they will learn the same thing, that they don't need you to be like them to validate them. We spend so much time in comparisons for that reason, which is sad. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others, because there's only one of us. We are each unique in who we're created. And even if we have some shared personality types and things like that, none of us go through the exact same experiences at the exact same time that impact how we develop. And so our uniqueness is so important that we understand. And when we try to not just learn principles that people use, but try to be exactly like them, we're set off on a journey that's doomed from the beginning. Jane has another comment. Exactly. We must teach the difference between loving ourselves as a child of God and the false love from an arrogant human viewpoint. Our egos get in the way too often. Indeed. What part of what causes ego is when we think that we are self-made. No, we're not. Don't mean to burst people's bubble. We're not self-made. What we do, though, is we determine if we develop and grow into who we really are. And so our choices impact who we end up being, but who we are is not our determination. We come created with a person. We are a person in the beginning from day one. And it depends on how we grow and develop as to whether or not we feel our purpose. And so another indicator for us about who we are is, what's our purpose? These are all just factors in understanding who we are. And but at the end of the day, I hope that you start with your values established. Quit trying to prove your value to anyone, because there's no need to. You and I and everyone else have the exact same priceless value as a person. We are amazingly valued by our Creator. And when we can get to the point that we can accept that and make our life choices based from that rather than proving ourselves, we're going to be a lot more content. We're going to be a lot more alive, and doing so with a lot less stress and imposter syndrome, all of these frustrating, sad things that we deal with unnecessarily. And does it mean that when we accept our value and we begin to understand who we are and live it, that it's going to be perfect? No. But it's going to be so much better than what most of us are doing today, that it's revolutionary. And Z has a comment. He says, if I can borrow wisdom from the Old Testament, God said to Moses, I am who I am. So I'm whom I'm made to be, and he or she is their own. Comparing to others is like a zero-sum game. Indeed, because it's not an accurate picture. It's not accurate to compare. We can learn, and I strongly recommend we learn from others, no doubt about it. But if we are trying to be exactly like anyone else, we're mistaken. We're chasing the wind, if you will, and we will be forever frustrated because we cannot be like anyone else perfectly. Our goal is to be as perfectly who we are as possible, and with that, it takes out internal conflict. See, so many of us are conflicted internally, imposter syndrome, whether it is deserved or not. Some people don't deserve to be dealing with imposter syndrome because they're being negatively influenced and affected by outside forces. Some people are imposters, so they're going to have imposter syndrome because they're imposters. And once we can find out who we are by design and purpose, we can then begin to live congruent. Misalignment in our lives creates such a great amount of problems. I am more convinced that the reason that we have so much dissatisfaction in the working world, in our working world, is because of misalignment. We're trying to work at something that is not congruent with who we are as a person. I know that, for example, sports, I am not a natural athlete. And I know that. But if I needed to, and if I decided that it just had to be that I've got to be in the athletic world, and that's going to be the only way I can provide for my needs, my family needs or something, I could work hard and try very hard to be it, probably get to a point of reasonable accomplishment in it. But the whole time, it's going to not be congruent with who I am. And it creates a lot of internal dissatisfaction, a lot of internal struggle. And a lot of us are living that every day. We have gotten ourselves in positions where we are trying to live and work and be who we are not, because either we don't like what we think our identity is, or we don't even know for sure what our identity is. So we're still trying to roll around like that tumbleweed and figure out if I can plant myself. The key is to look first, find out, are you a tumbleweed? And if you're a tumbleweed, accept it and go with it and then grow into it. But if you're not, if you really are, like Anton talked about, a mighty oak tree, but you're trying to be a tumbleweed, I'm picturing something in my head. Picture an oak tree trying to tumble around. It's going to look pretty strange. It's going to be awkward. It is going to be damaging to the oak tree. Whereas if a tumbleweed rolls around, it's designed to roll around. It works great. And so take time. Make this a priority in your life to find out who you have been created to be with what purpose. And when we begin to do that, we begin to be freer and more contented, have joy in our life, because we're all designed, by the way, to live that design. And when we do it, it makes a huge difference for us. What we aren't designed to do, by the way, is to live anxiously and in fear and to struggle against ourselves. That's not part of our design. Our design is to understand who we are and live in accordance with it. And when we do that, it changes things. We become contented, and what is described in biblical terms is we learn about living abundantly. And abundance is about living who we're designed to be and live it well. That's what brings abundance. Satisfaction. We have so many people that are living a life that they're not satisfied with. And unfortunately, the answer to that quite often is, well, if I just had more money, that'd fix everything. No, a lot of people with a lot of money are going, this is not it, or is this it? Because it's not. We're looking in the wrong places to identify who we are, and looking in the wrong ways. So identity is such a key component. As Anton said, we're the Human SOS show. A lot of what we're coming around to, and human sustainability, is about living without being in constant state of high stress. Doesn't mean also living without stress. That's not practical. It's not healthy. It's about living in such a way that we are managing stress. And one of the best ways to manage stress is to not have stress unnecessarily by trying to live someone else's identity, or to live without a clear identity of our own. Either of those is not a healthy place to be. And also, just as a given, remember, our identity is going to be based in the fact that we are created with three parts. Our identity is wrapped up in our whole person, and that means body, soul, and spirit. And when we don't find our identity in all aspects of us as a person, we're going to miss the reality, the truth of who we are, because we're not looking at in holistic terms who we are. Jane makes the comment, too many people live with worry and fear. You can't have faith and worry. We have a choice. I tell you, Jane, going through the pandemic, one of my biggest beefs, my biggest concerns was the amount of fear that was put out, and to a point that it caused so many people not to have healthy fear. There's healthy fear, but we're not designed to live in a constant state of fear. It is not the way we are created. And when we do it, wow, the implications mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, living in fear is so unhealthy. And when we were put in that situation, it took a toll on our society, on our culture, that it'll be years before we really understand how big the impact of that has been and how damaging it has been to us as people. And so fear is not a place we're supposed to live. Even, imposter syndrome is another fear of being found out. The best way not to have the fear of being found out is let people see who we are. There is then no being found out. They see us, they get it, that we are who we are. And when we live like that, the freedom is remarkable. Let's see. Z has a comment. Our personal needs are so unique to us at a period of time. It can't be the same need of someone else or not at the same level of need. Better to focus on and understanding our own needs. Indeed, the one caution is make sure we understand what our needs are and not just what our wants are. One of the downsides to our cultures is that they have become more about our wants than our needs. And when we base it on needs, things become truer and less subject to the winds of times and winds of circumstances. Ultimately, another value of having a clear understanding of our identity is that we are less likely to be tossed around by life storms. And it's, the freedom involved in not being tossed around by our circumstances and weathering through them well is just, it's remarkable. And if you ever get a taste of that freedom and do so in a healthy fashion, then it's remarkable. And I mean, again, I find myself making sure communication is clear. And what I'm talking about is in freedom is not license. It's not license to do whatever we want to do based on emotion, based on circumstances, and so on. Freedom is about the readiness and willingness and commitment to doing what we should do and do it well. And that should is based on us, not necessarily on what our circumstances dictate. We have to adjust. Once we're solid in who we are, then we learn how to respond from that solid basis in different circumstances. And that's where balance comes in and wisdom. One of the things for those of you know me that I am preaching, if you will, is learning wisdom, seeking wisdom, because we have a lot of people walking around that are living on knowledge. And living on knowledge alone is unhealthy, and it contributes to us making some very bad choices in our life. And the choices we make become what affects our future. And when we choose not to understand our identity, find our identity and live it, then the consequences is remarkably bad. And so identity, we've been talking about that this morning and how it factors in. Start somewhere trying to understand your identity, finding out who you are as at the core of who you are. And I will tell you, you've got to look beyond the physical. If you only look at the physical, you'll never measure up because there's always someone bigger, stronger, whatever. And you got to look in the mental emotional. But if you only look at mental emotional by itself, there's going to always be someone that's more empathetic or more intellectual or whatever. And if you look at spiritual, your spirit, and you compare, There's always going to be someone more spiritually attuned, or more learning how to be intuitive, and different parts. Look at your whole being and begin to have an understanding of who you are. And then once you begin to understand, because it's a growth process, it's not an event, but as you begin to understand who you are and live congruently with it, it's just such a remarkable experience. It's so freeing that it's amazing. And so I just encourage us all, don't be blown around and live in misery, because you have no rudder based on who you are as a person. You have no clearly defined identity based on you, not on other people that we idolize or look at and say, oh, they're the one. No, find your identity and begin to live it. And when you do that, it's very freeing. It is a place of where you can live contentedly, with joy, and with peace. Part of the reason we're not at peace is because we're living who we're not. So, a lot of impact. Find out your identity. Take time, make the effort, get help through books and through videos and through family, through people. Use all of those tools to get insight as to who you are, and then begin to go, okay, it's who I am. What are the choices I should make in light of that? And when you begin to make those choices in light of that, then life takes on a whole different perspective. And for some people, going through this is going to not just be a bit of change and adjustment, it's going to be a revolution in their life. And that's okay. Better that than to get to the end of your life and go, wow, I lived a lie, or I regret not having, and the list is long. That's not a happy place. That's not a good place. It's not a healthy place. So seek out what your identity is. Please consider that as a human being, you have value that nothing can change. You can't affect it and change it. Other people can't affect it and change it. That value is intrinsic. Live knowing that. When you do, and quit trying to prove our value, then we have a much better chance of learning who we are, who we're designed to be, and be okay and love who that is, and then be able to go out and love other people as who they are. The freedom in it is remarkable. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate all of you being here today, and I appreciate the comments, and I know Anton does too. We talk about all the time how your presence and your engagement makes a huge difference. I do encourage you to ask others to join us in the Human SOS movement, because our ultimate goal in the Human SOS movement is to help everyone figure out how to live sustainably at all levels in their life, because as we do that, we actually can help make the world a better place as by doing so. So hashtag Human SOS. Hope that someday that you will join us and be involved and push forward as we grow and go in the Human SOS movement. So God bless. Have a great week. Come back and join us next Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock. If you have a topic related to human sustainability that you would like us to talk about, feel free to suggest it and let us know. So thanks, everyone. See you next week. God